James Jenny.
Good afternoon, good evening, Director again. I'm on the Justice Select Committee. I think I should perhaps disclose that.
And double whammy you get.
We've had a previous discussion on these matters, and there is such a lot in what you've said. And the first thing I just want to ask you, and hopefully we both will be straight to the point, is I was rather shocked or stunned with your statement, and this could well be wrong. That you actually said when we charge the guilty. When we charge the guilty, which is an interesting terminology, because if you're charging the guilty, there's very little point in it going in front of a court. In that case, the job of the Crown Prosecution Service is to assess, as you've already said, the test as to whether there is sufficient evidence to potentially convict somebody. So you aren't charging the guilty, are you? You're charging people who are potentially not guilty, but there is sufficient evidence to justify a charge. Would that be right?
Well, I'll take the criticism for trying to avoid the detailed language of the code, but under the challenge, I will read to you in terms what the Code for Crown Prosecutors says at paragraph 4.7, because that sets out very clearly the test, and that is that an objective, impartial and reasonable jury or bench of magistrates or judge hearing a case alone, properly directed and acting in accordance with the law, is more likely than not to convict the defendant of the charge alleged.
That's not charging the guilty. That's
Essentially guilty, not guilty.
So that's the point. And it gets back to what Mr. Holloway was just asking you questions in respect of, is the issue here. There is very little point in one sense of us talking about your conviction rate of 68% for the amount of cases that you charge, which is a ridiculously small amount of the number of complaints. I mean, I think certainly in Greater Manchester, the charging rate is about 1% in Greater Manchester. Just for the record, what is the charging rate for the whole of the country that you get through? So what percentage of complaints come through to the Crown Prosecution Service?
What I can tell you is that the proportion of rape investigations that we charge is, in the last quarter, was 69%.
I accept that, and that's not the point I'm making. We have I think you quoted the figure of there was 11,000. I can't put the figure in front of me. 200 complaints of rape made during a set period of time. I think my figures were that 3,000 of those were referred to you. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Rather than messing around with numbers, can I just ask you a straightforward question?
Yes.
On the latest figures that you have, you are aware of the amount of complaints of rape that are made to the police, the total number. What percentage of that total number are referred to the Crown Prosecution Service?
Around 10%.
It's around 10%.
And of that 10%, by proportion, we charge over 2/3 of the cases that we see.
Okay. So, give or take, we are looking at somewhere between 6 and 7% of the total cases that are the total complaints that are made to the police end up in a charge.
Yes.
And you convict, or the figures are that the conviction rate for that 6% is about 68%.
That's right.
So we're then getting down to, and I've never been very good at maths, but somewhere between 4 and 5%
yeah,
of the total number of complaints of rape in this country lead to a conviction. Now, to me, and again, I'm a pretty naive fellow about these types of things, that is appallingly bad. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree, and let me be clear, the opportunity that we all have through these scorecards, through the joint working, is to make it clear, as you helpfully have, that there's a lot more to do, and we have to look right across the system rather than concentrating in one place only.
Director, I understand it, Director, and I genuinely, you are an eminent lawyer, and I have the utmost respect in respect to the job that you're doing. But when I don't think, us politicians get quite rightly, should we say, challenged on many things that we do. But one of the things that we expect, I think, or one of the things when we question, is a basic level of competence in respect of a job. Nothing miraculous, just the basic level of competence. And when you come in front of us and say that the police should have an offender-centric approach, and that's a revolution, an offender-centric approach, I mean, I'm staggered that hasn't been the police, the way that these matters have been approached for the last however long it's been on the... If you don't take into account the nature of the offender, and I think one of the things that you've actually said, which is extremely significant, which you seem to suggest, was that instead of actually concentrating an investigation on what the offender has done, the police seem to be concentrating on the character and nature of the complaint. Which, I mean, very helpfully, you're nodding, but that is what you're saying effectively, isn't it?
I'm not saying that in every case the police are investigating wrongly, and I haven't come here to point the finger at the police. I've come here to accept the very real responsibility that we have to do everything we can. But it is a fact that in the past there are examples where cases have been investigated from perhaps only one perspective, when if you'd looked at it from another, you might have actually been able to change the outcome.
I understand that, and that's a very fair point. But when you also say to us that one of the things that police officers and the CPS could do is perhaps have a phone call at an early stage, it's hardly what I would suggest as revolutionary stuff. And if during the last, I mean, as you know, we've both been doing this I did it for 16 years. I'm certainly aware that during that period of time, phone calls were being made between. This is nothing new. So you're not telling us, you're not coming in front of this committee and telling us that we've got a new way of dealing with this matter. It is just incompetence. It's an incompetent way of dealing with matters. Can I ask you this? Release under investigation at this moment in time. How many cases in in England and Wales, how many rape allegations are currently released under investigation?
And you've asked me that question before in front of the other committee, and I said then and say now, I don't know, and I wouldn't know, because if a case is released under investigation by the police, that means it doesn't come to us. So I can't give numbers. What I can say is that it is quite clear since 2017 and the Police Act legislation of that year that there has been a very substantial increase in the use of release under investigation as opposed to a bail act approach where an investigation will go on with an individual subject to bail conditions. We are now waiting, because all of this legislation is not for us but is for Parliament, we are now waiting for the current court bill to go through and to see whether there are differences in approach which might reduce the number of cases released under investigation.
Really terribly sorry to interrupt, Director, and I'm not trying to be difficult here, but it goes back to what Dame Diana was just asking you about. If you are saying to us as a committee that you need a joined-up approach, so this is the relationship between all the agencies, including the Crown Prosecution Service and the police, the fact that you do not know and feel that you should not know the amount of cases that are being investigated by the police is, frankly, worrying is probably the nicest way to put that, because you should know that. And that as part of your role, RASO does not work. None of it works unless the Crown Prosecution Service are proactively involving themselves in how the police are investigating rape allegations in their area. Because on the logic that you've just said, this is allowing the police months and months and months, if not years, to allow investigations to slip and nothing to happen. And while that happens, victims, everybody involved in the system is being let down. Would you agree with that?
Well, I've said and absolutely maintain that we need to continue the focus, to increase the numbers, to do better in terms of outcome, and to give greater support to victims. I don't go so far as to say that in each and every case, with every report of crime, that must automatically be reported to the Crown Prosecution Service, which is far smaller than policing in this country. What we have done and continue to do is give guidance and training as the circumstances in which we encourage the police to come to us, for example, for early advice on how to conduct their investigation. Some of that is mandated by the Attorney General's guidelines on disclosure, which have been in place for almost exactly a year, and my own guidance on charging, which went to a 6th edition on New Year's Eve last year too.
One final question, Gareth. You've been very clear in respect to that. Right. When Mr. Holloway asked you the questions, you made, and I'm sorry again, I don't have the exact figures, but they are on the record, that you said that it was let us hope, or whatever the phraseology you used, that we were able to increase the throughput from the police to the Crown Prosecution Service. I may have got it wrong by 200 to 300%. It was a figure such as that. Now, if we take that is your intention, as an organisation to increase the number of cases that are coming through, and as Mr Holloway points out, the number of those cases, I think we accept, are potentially cases that could be charged, because 90% of the rape allegations are disappearing into the ether. You've not even looked at the strength of the evidence of those, so half of those could be, could pass the charging standard. I just want to know, specifically, how are we going to do it? How are you, as the Crown Prosecution Service, if you don't know what these cases are, what they are and released under investigation, how are you going to get them in front of you for advice?
Well, what we are here to do is to say, this is what the law requires. Whether it's rape or any other offence, this is what the law requires. If we are to prosecute, these are the legal elements of the offence. This is what the proof, therefore, that a court will require of a charged case. And in the documents that I referred to, including the charging guidance, we make that very clear. And there are many cases, many investigations, where the police on their own are perfectly capable of reaching a conclusion about which cases can come forward and which will not. And indeed, as a national statistic, about 63% of all of the crime charged in this country is charged by the police and not by the Crown Prosecution Service. So it's only a minority of cases that do come to us.
Director, I do accept that. There's no way in 1,000 years that 90% of rape convictions should be discontinued before they get through to you. No way in 1,000 years. And the question, therefore, is for us here, that those cases which should come through to you, at the very least, or your organisation, how does that happen? And how do we make sure as a committee, how can we, if we have to go to the police and ask the police, what are you doing about this? We'll ask the police, but RASO's all about joined up working. Yeah. If you're not having an input into how that's going to happen, we're going to continue to have this problem for the next however many years.
Let me try and answer that by giving you an example from Operation Bluestone. I went to Bristol 2 weeks ago and I sat in the CPS offices in Bristol and talked to our RASO unit, our rape and serious sexual offence prosecutors, alongside 2 senior officers from Avon and Somerset Police. That's a very good sign that in one room you have investigators and prosecutors. And I was taken through what is called the gold standard investigation and response to RASO. It's actually capable of being drawn up on an A4 sheet of paper. What stands out to me in that document, which I hadn't seen, it's a police document, I hadn't seen it until 2 weeks ago, is that there are 5 occasions on that sheet of paper where there's specific reference to going to the CPS, to have a conversation, to seek advice, to take the case through. That I take as a really good sign. I think it's an excellent initiative by Avon and Somerset. It's been picked up rapidly by our RASO unit. It is being replicated in the Operation Soteria pilots. And if I'd been looking 2 years ago, I'm not sure that I would have found 5 reference points where there is a reminder to investigators to check in with the Crown Prosecution Service. So that's the structure that's being put in place, and that's why I say I'm confident that we will see more cases coming through. I just find it very difficult to say exactly what the volume is going to be, because we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, I want to come back to those